She had everything: a college degree, a steady job, a house in a leafy suburb, even 2 cars. But overnight, her world unraveled. In Cape Town, lawyer Jayde Koen and her husband once enjoyed a comfortable middle-life class. When the COVID pandemic hit, it all fell apart. Her husband's work hours vanished, inflation exploded, and suddenly, we're just pushing through, hoping we can breathe again soon. They sold 1 car, started cooking less to save electricity, and leaned to grandparents to survive. This isn't a lone story. It's happening from Lagos to Nairobi to Johannesburg. But a decade ago, the African Development Bank estimated about 313 million Africans, roughly 1 in 3, were middle class. Today, with inflation at generational high and job markets collapsing, many of those families are sliding back towards poverty. How could the dream of Africans' booming middle class fade so fast? Welcome to AfriWealthWise, where we ignite the spirit of finance independence and entrepreneurship in Africa's future billionaires. In the early 2000s, a new narrative took hold. Africa was rising, with China-like growth rates, natural resource booms, and expanding democracy. Headlines proclaimed a growing middle class across Africa. The African Development Bank even counted the middle class at 34% of the population by 2010, nearly 350 million people. That count used a broad definition, about $2 to $20 per person per day, a range that included many barely above poverty. By the AFDB own reckoning, 60% of those middle-class families were just a hair above the poverty line, still vulnerable to any setback. In other words, the term middle class was already fuzzy. One African analyst warned it was often used so loosely it meant little to nothing, without clear boundaries. Still, the perception grew. Shopping malls sprouted in Lagos, Accra and Nairobi. Mobile phones went from luxury to ubiquitous, with 500 million sub-Saharan Africans now subscribed. African cities saw new high-rise offices and tech hubs. Nairobi's Silicon Savannah, Lagos' Yaba neighborhood, Accra's smart city projects. Consumer spending by African households surged, AFDB estimated, in 2008. The so-called middle class spent about $680 billion a year, nearly a quarter of the continent's GDP. Tourism was up. Mobile banking like Kenya's M-PESA revolutionized payment, and diaspora sent money home. In 2021, sub-Saharan Africa received about $49 billion in remittance. Leaders and investors talked about millions of new jobs, rising incomes, better schools, and healthcare, a virtuous circle of growth. Yet in those hopeful times, cracks appeared. Inequality remained extreme. As one commentator noted, Nigeria, Africa's largest economy, had half its people in poverty, while its 5 richest billionaires had enough combined wealth, $29 billion, to end extreme poverty. In Lagos' Dolphin Estate, a middle-class enclave, a National Geographic photographer found a surprising scene. On one block, he saw ramshackle buildings and no electricity, yet shiny new cars and well-dressed professionals on the next street. Many of those new middle-class consumers were still paying high rent for slum-like apartments. Even the engineers and teachers there had drivers washing their shiny cars, a stark symbol that 2 Africans exist side by side. In those boom years, millions leaped forward. Families left subsistence farming for city offices. A Kenyan farmer got a cell phone and became a mobile money banker for neighbors. A Nigerian tailor opened a small shop with microloan support. A Ghanaian teacher bought land to farm on weekends. Telecom giants like MTN and Safaricom connected entire nations almost overnight. Mobile internet penetration climbed towards 30%, giving those villages access to information and markets. Finance grew too. Local banks, microfinance institutions, and insurance products finally reached the previously unbanked. Real estate blossomed. Business districts in Nairobi and Casablanca sprouted gleaming towers, and new middle-class housing estates spread outside cities. Tech startups like Jumia and Dela and InterSwitch began attracting global investors and Africa's first unicorns. Multi-billion-dollar private tech companies emerged. Throughout 2000 to 2015, GDP growth averaged around 5 to 6% of the region, the fastest pace since independence. Strong growth meant public education and healthcare budgets rose, and a new wage-earning class emerged. Students from middle-income families went to college in record numbers. Many families tasted real progress, commuting on new highways, eating at malls, sending kids to private schools, even taking summer vacations. According to the Nigeria's AfDB officials, by 2010, over one-third of Nigeria's citizens were using a mobile money or e-wallet service. Unheard of in the 1990s, Uganda entrepreneur Solomon put a smartphone in his first-come shop, and today, he runs an app-based agri-tech service. In Accra, taxi driver Kojo saved to buy a motorbike for delivery gigs, doubling his income. In Johannesburg, factory worker Kyo opened a spaza corner store on weekends and began investing in education for his children. These personal stories embodied a collective one. The continent's middle of the pyramid had grown. By 2010, corporate demand across Africa was soaring because that large new class was hungry for goods and services. Then the earth shook. In the late 2010s, and especially after 2020, global and local shock battered Africa's middle class. First came the commodity crunch. Oil prices tanked, so oil exporters like Nigeria and Angola suffered. Then COVID lockdown collapsed tourism, manufacturing halted, and thousands of formal jobs vanished. Governments borrowed heavily to support economy and medical systems. Now inflation, from fuel to food, is burning through savings. The IMF warns that inflation remains double digits in about one-third of sub-Saharan African countries. In fact, African inflation rate in 2022 was the highest since the 2008 financial crisis. In South Africa, power cuts and rising fuel prices made everything cost more. In Kenya, the shilling lost value, driving up bread and building materials. Ghana cedi lost almost 20% of its value against dollar in the early 2024, sending prices of imports and loans sky high. And Nigeria's naira went into free fall. By October 2023, it was 70% weaker than it had been a year earlier, fueling inflation at a 28-year high. This economy storm has unleashed aftershocks. It's like having an earthquake followed by aftershocks, one economist said. As inflation chased down COVID's disruptions, in practical terms, that means salaries buy less. A government clerk might earn the same number of cedis she did in 2022, but can no longer afford a quarter of the groceries she used to. Middle class budget crack under the stress. Electricity and water bills double. Rent takes a bigger chunk, and suddenly there's little left for schooling and healthcare. Many middle-income families report cutting back on basic. Mothers defer taking children to the clinic for checkups. Students switch from private tutors to street vendors, and heads of household take on second or third jobs just to make ends meet. Youth unemployment, always Africa's persistent problem, has reached crisis level in many places. According to the AfDB, Africa's 15 to 35 years old number about 420 million, but one-third of them are unemployed or have stopped looking for work, and another third hold only insecure jobs. Only about 1 in 6 young Africans is in a stable wage-paying job. That means most are in informal gig economy, buying and selling, driving taxis or motorcycles, selling food on the side. In fact, about 95% of Africa's working youth are in vulnerable informal employment, with roughly 12 million young people entering the labor market every year, but only 3.1 million new jobs being created. The mismatch is stark. This has frightening social consequences. Protests, rising inequalities, and a sense of betrayal among the educated youth who expected opportunities but see empty streets instead. For example, South Africa's youth unemployment hit 64.2% in 2021, despite the country's relative wealth. In short, the promise of millions of good jobs evaporated, and middle class began to unravel under the strain. Illustrating these pressures, in Dakar, Senegal, Amina Gueye, a 34-year-old executive assistant, finds things getting tougher financially. Despite holding a solid job, her employer's wages haven't kept pace with food prices. She needs her parents to help each month just to cover groceries. In neighboring Nigeria, hundreds protested after fuel prices were nearly double, even burning effigies of politicians in rage over rising costs. All over Africa, the aspirational symbol of middle-class life, smartphone, schooling, car loans, are now crushing burdens for many families. When the Central Bank of Nigeria shifted to a single market-based exchange rate in 2023, the naira plunged from 632 naira per dollar in June to about 774 by October. with black market rates nearly 1,035 naira, a 30 to 70% devaluation in months. The result? Imported food, medicine, spare parts, and even daily car fares shot up overnight. Debts and mortgage that seemed manageable on 2019 incomes now loom large. Governments themselves are deep in debt. Ghana debt exceeded 88% of GDP in 2022, so social programs and loans often carried high rates. In Nigeria, the new government spent over 2/3 of all revenues just on debt services, leaving little to shield people from shocks. Currency devaluation also means savings erode. Think of it as a home rapidly flooding. What looks like small leak at first ends up drowning your savings tank. In cities, public services strain under this fragility. Many African capitals already lacked universal water, electricity, or sanitation. Now, energy blackouts and fuel shortages make daily life precarious, even for the well-off. Gated communities find their security staff underpaid or striking. Urban housing is a particular pressure point. A recent analysis shows formal mortgages and housing loans usually require proof of regular income, excluding most of the new middle class. In practice, 60% of Nigerians in cities cannot afford even the cheapest housing. Luxury apartments stand half empty while sprawling slums grow on the outskirts. As income shrinks, the human toil is immense. Families once paying for private schools now switch to cash classrooms or drop out. Across sub-Saharan Africa, about 1/3 of children leaving primary school due to financial pressure. Parents shave budget to keep one child in school, sacrificing the other's education. One doctor in Lagos told the CNN team that he started deferring his own surgeries because his patients couldn't pay. Meaning in Kenya, which once dreamed of training every youth, now sees a generation of losing out on skills. In Ghana, story after story emerged of hard-working middle-class families who suddenly couldn't pay tuition or rent. Healthcare is similarly jeopardized. Without universal insurance, medical emergencies are catastrophic expenses. Report shows a large share of African families face catastrophic out-of-pocket health costs, often a full month income or more. One brief survey found roughly 40% of family undergoing even routine child surgery had to borrow money or sell assets. When a parent falls ill with malaria or cancer, the family often goes into debt to pay hospital fees. This means that illnesses can quickly erase a decade of savings. Housing has become a nightmare for those who had homes. Mortgages rates have risen, and many middle-class borrowers bought home in foreign currencies. When local currencies dive, loan payments balloon, construction costs are up, so even middle-class apartment prices are out of reach. Many are forced to move out from owned homes to rent or even into crowded multi-generational housing. Consider the Bakari family in Lagos. They were featured in National Geographic as emblematic of the new middle class. Yet, in the current crisis, even families like his fear they won't make ends meet. Intergenerational wealth, the dream parents had for their children, is drying up. A teacher who planned to pass down land or savings to a university-bound child now worries the child may have to work instead of study. Many have exhausted their emergency funds. Grandparents who once helped bear costs are now being pulled back to the edge of rising costs. In short, the collapse of middle class threatens the educational and professional future of an entire generation. Consider the story of Kofi and Ama. Kofi, 45, is a civil engineer. Ama, 43, sold fabrics in a small shop. They had 2 children, Mansat and Kwesi, both in primary school. In the 2010s, they thought they were secure. They paid school fees, repaid a small mortgage on a modest house, and even managed the family savings account. Then costs began to rise. Ama's imports of clothes got twice as expensive. Kofi's government salary stayed the same. They first crashed out some savings, then sold their old SUV. By 2023, Ama had to close her shop on weekends to take a small part-time job cleaning offices. Kofi began moonlighting as a rideshare driver at night, but it wasn't enough. Ama recounts one evening, "I look at my children eating their dinner, rice and beans, the cheapest meal. I had to bite back tears. They used to have meat or milk in their cereal. Now even that is too expensive." Mansa often goes to sleep hungry. Eventually they faced hard choices. If they took Kwasi out of chess and English classes, and moved Mansa from a well-graded school to a local public one. Textbooks that were once retained fees are now paid late or not at all. Ama still weeps quietly. We worked all our lives to give these kids a better chance. Now I feel like we are pulling the future out from under them. Kofi feels the shame and fear keenly. After a lifetime of labor, he is afraid he cannot provide the stability he promised his family. Every evening, as a storm of mosquitoes gather around their own air-conditioned apartment, they stopped buying mosquito spray to save money. Kofi lies awake, wondering how to keep the lights on. Their story echoes those of millions. Skilled, hardworking, people sleeping off the ladder they had climbed, with their children watching in confusion and fear. Despite this grim picture, the narrative isn't all doom. And this is where AfriWealthWise aims to empower you. Africa is full of innovators and survivors. In crisis, creativity and entrepreneurship often surge. Remember, even now, more than 1 in 5 working-age Africans starts a new business. More than 75% of African youth plan to start their own venture in the next 5 years. Those aren't just stats. They reflect a culture of resilience. The very ingenuity that built the middle class can be turned to rebuild. Here are some practical ideas. Embrace entrepreneurship and side hustles. Formal jobs may be scarce, but startups and side businesses are not. It has been noted that Africa has the world's highest entrepreneurship rate. If a stable corporate gig disappears, consider turning a skill or a hobby into income. Can you drive passengers, tutor online, sell handcrafts, offer agribusiness services, or launch a farming co-op? Even small ventures like selling goods on mobile marketplaces or start a neighborhood grocery can generate steady cash. Support is available. Organizations like the African Development Bank or local incubators offer funding and training for micro-enterprises. For example, Nigeria's Tony Elumelu Foundation grants daily capital to young African entrepreneurs. The point is, don't wait for someone else to create a job. Create your own. Upgrade digital and technical skills. The future economy is digital. It's projected that by 2030, about 230 million African jobs will require digital skills. If you are 18 to 40, invest in yourself now. Online courses, many are free, can teach coding, graphic design, digital marketing, data analysis, or e-commerce. Even basic computer literacy and social media know how to multiply your earning options. You could freelance for clients worldwide or participate in online education platforms. Remember, every $1 invested in ICT yields about $20 in GDP growth. Imagine what mastering a tech skill could yield for your household's income. From Nairobi to Lagos, young Africans are already thriving as remote workers or tech startup founders. You could be next. Diversify income streams, side hustles. Relying on a single salary is risky. Cultivate multiple income sources. If you have savings or land, even a small farm or livestock can generate food and cash. Even a few chickens can be sold for extra income. Keep an informal side business alive. For example, driving for a ride-hail service or selling goods after hours. In rural areas, some middle-class families are planting fast-growing crops or raising fish ponds to ensure against food price shocks. In cities, ride-sharing and delivery apps allow you to work weekends or nights and earn foreign currencies sometimes. Prudent saving and asset management. In high inflation, cash loses value. If possible, convert those savings into durable assets, gold jewelries or coins, or international currencies or productive assets such as farming tools, solar panels, livestock, or even a piece of land. Community saving schemes, tontins, or stockvels can also help you accumulate modest capital to invest or fall back on. The lesson: if your money is losing value in the bank, find ways to lock it into something that would hold value or yield a return. For instance, paying your children's vocational training or a certification can be viewed as investing in a future paycheck. Leverage community and diaspora. Tap into community networks and family abroad. If you have relatives working overseas, remittance can be life-saving. Reminder, Africa saw $49 billion of these in 2021. Even if you are on your own, build a support network, form cooperatives to buy bulk food or supplies more cheaply, share childcare and resources with trusted neighbors, or pool resources to build and repair common infrastructure. Community is a strength Africans have historically relied on. Continue learning and innovating. The African middle class was built on education and skill. Now, more than ever, lifelong learning matters. If formal schooling got interrupted, pick up vocational training or online courses. Learn even basic entrepreneurship. Learn how to budget, market your product, or do mobile banking. Governments and NGOs often offer free or subsidized training. Investigate local opportunities, like tech hubs that train coders for free. Knowledge is an edge against unemployment. Mindset of resilience. The biggest asset you have is your adaptability. Stories from history show Africa's response to hardship by innovating. Think of how mobile money filled a banking gap, or how small markets emerged during past crises. Keep that mindset. Instead of asking, what do I do? Ask, what can I create? The challenges are real, but so is the opportunity. One striking insight: Africa's youth bulge can become a demographic dividend. With proper skills and opportunity, hundreds of millions of young Africans could form the most dynamic consumer market on earth. It's up to us to steer this future. Each new business, each extra skill learned, each prudent investment chipped away from fragility. Remember that even in hard times, Africa entrepreneurs launched billions of dollars in new ventures over the last decade. If you can identify a need in your community, there's probably a way to meet it. Health delivery service, clean energy repairs, e-learning for children at home, small-scale manufacturing of daily goods, and so on.